Welcome to our fourth Revenue Performance webinar series. I'm Calvin Johnson, CEO, co-founder at Brevity. The topic we have today is very timely, I think. Everybody has a different sales cycle, so we wanted to, Q1 historically for us has not been the fastest quarter historically at Brevity. Usually our big lifts are Q2 and Q4. So we thought this is something that we're running into. So want to discuss some strategies on driving urgency in a historically slower quarter. What are those talk tracks look like? What are those suggestions or strategies or tactics that can help hold your ICP, your economic buyers and technical users to the fire? But we do have some announcements we want to make. If you want to go to the next slide. One of our big philosophies here at Brevity, as being a revenue performance partner, not an AI-powered role-play vendor, is your scoreboard becomes our scoreboard, right? So whether you guys have pipeline generation challenges, whether you have win rate challenges, whether your teams are struggling to increase that percentage of reps hitting quota, we stand by that, and not just in our words, but also in our actions. We have doubled our headcount in the last 3 months. We received a large investment from our lead investor, Illuminate Ventures out of Silicon Valley, who specializes in B2B SaaS. So welcome Illuminate Ventures to the family. And in order for your scoreboard to become our scoreboard, it's about great technology, where Eric Nelson, my co-founder, they've done a great job on the technology front, but it's more than just technology. It's also the people and process. So I want to welcome a new team member who's going to be really driving a lot of these revenue performance webinars, Dustin Harper. Fun fact about Dustin, I've never been in an interview process where I've interviewed somebody for 18 months before actually meeting them live. Dustin has been a consistent guest on the Brutal Truth of Sales and Selling podcast. He's been a consistent guest on the Sales Leadership Show. And he's also the #1 and preferred implementer of Brian Burns's Maverick Method. Anytime you can work with people that you can learn a lot from, that know more than you, it's always a blessing and a benefit. I'm just proud to be working alongside with Dustin. He's going to be hyper-focused on our strategic accounts. But we also have new additional team members I want to highlight, and on the customer success side, Elisa, Brad, and Kyle Holder, all really responsible for everybody on this call accomplishing their ROI. So we've doubled our headcount in the last 3 months to really help everybody on this call eclipse their revenue targets. With that being said, I want to hand it over to Dustin.
Appreciate that, Kelvin. Thank you. And good to see everybody here today. I recognize a lot of faces already, and hopefully we'll continue to meet everyone. Quick question, just to break the ice a little bit. Who is happy that the Eagles beat the Chiefs and we're not going to be hearing about Taylor Swift the next few months? Or do we have a ton of Swifties out there? There's probably some Swifties. Ben, I could see you being a Swiftie for sure. Is anybody raise the hand? Go ahead, Andy. Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Andy.
It hurts to cheer for the Eagles. I mean, there's just something physically wrong about that, but I did enjoy seeing them win. I think they were the better team.
Just a heads up, I am a Philadelphia. I grew up in West Philadelphia, so I don't slap people in the face, nor am I one of those Eagles fans. So just want to give that quick caveat. Oh, and I see people leaving already. So no, never mind.
Okay, we got Michael said he's a Swiftie. All right, so we got a few people that will admit it, but now I just want to break that a little bit. And then, I mean, by the way, today, want to make it conversational. Definitely don't want to be talking the whole time. So whether it's the chat or bringing you up on stage here, want to get you guys talking as much as possible. But Kelvin, appreciate the intro. Just quick about me. Don't want to go deep into it, but one of the epiphanies I had was I started paying for a coach, and that was actually Brian Burns about 6 or 7 years ago. So I was doing well, but I just switched industries, and I just wanted to get to that top level. And he was the first coach I ever paid for out of my own pocket. And it's crazy how things go full circle sometimes, but so much wisdom from Brian. I don't think he could join today, but want to give him a shout out because I definitely probably wouldn't be talking right now with this group if I wouldn't have made that first investment years ago. And then Kelvin, right back at you. Appreciate the warm welcome. And the rest of the team, it's been a great start. I'm in my third week, I believe, but it feels like I've already been here for months and excited for the future. And I'm not going to go full into my background, but I've been in sales my whole career, whether it was power tools, medical device, and then I went to the startup world. But the two epiphanies that I've had that have really driven my career is first, documenting your sales process and having a blueprint. I found there's just so much you have to keep track of. It's impossible to keep it in your head. So writing it down in some form or fashion, trying to prevent mistakes or traps from happening, and understanding how companies make decisions. That's really what drives a lot of my success. And I'm a big believer in that. That's why I love Brevity. And then the second thing, which I talk about a little bit today, but if you follow me on LinkedIn, I do a lot, is really the mindset side of sales, because we get beat up so much. There's bad days, bad weeks, you lose a big deal. How do you recover from that? And it's easy to have that fixed mindset. So really navigating that roller coaster of sales, stuff like morning routines, habits, trying to get a growth mindset. I'm all about that. So if you want to chat on the side about any of that, let me know. But let's get into today. Ben, go ahead and go to the next slide. So trying to bring some humor, but I think we've all been here, right? We're in the middle of Q1, and in sales, it seems like we're always following up. We're always checking in. We're always circling back. So if you guys can't see the screen, I'll read it for you, but it's a meme. Thank you for calling me right after sending me an email so we could talk about your email that I haven't read yet. So basically, it's just this never-ending cycle of following up. And it's tough, right? Sales has gotten harder. Things have definitely changed the last few years. And we have empathy for that situation. But today is really about how do we not get into that trap and drive urgency when sometimes you're in the middle of a slow quarter. So go ahead, Ben. So question of the group, you can use the chat or preferably someone talk, but is anybody running into stalled deals right now? I mean, we're right in the middle of Q1. People are have a hangover from the holidays. January's very chaotic. Does anybody have any examples of, like, just in general, is it hard to get stuff done in Q1, or have you been seeing people just keep pushing things off? Anyone want to chime in?
I would say traditionally what I've seen where reps struggle in Q1 is they're focused on closing the slip deals that came over from December that they didn't properly qualify and close. And then they're focused on rebuilding the pipeline. And I think the problem stems more from conversations back in November and December with their manager of being laser focused on just getting through the quarter and the year and closing those deals versus carving out time in November, December to talk about January and February of what is your plan? What are you trying to do? What are the deals? And making sure that's top of mind then versus like right now, if you only have opportunities in the early sales stages, there's very little magic pixie dust you can do now to move stuff into negotiation and closing. But so that has to be something top of mind in my mind, for top of mind of reps and managers looking ahead in the same way right now as you look at Q2, April, May. What are you doing? What are those opportunities? What about July? What are you doing? And so having those conversations now to set the table for those lull periods is something that has to be on an onus of the manager and the rep ahead of time.
Totally agree. Because if you're experiencing that right now, it might be because of what you didn't do in November, December, to your point, and getting ahead of it. But it's still being proactive versus reactive. Because if we're talking about it now, you can make some steps to try to not have this happen Q2, Q3. I agree.
The expression, the best time to have talked about it was December. The second best time is right now.
No doubt. We also had David chime in the chat. He said, we saw those delays in Q4, but it's starting to open up in Q1 now. Seeing a lot of capital spending and expansion starting to be planned and budgeting for. Okay, definitely a good sign. Anybody else have any feedback before I go over the definition? Sounds good. So really just the definition of what is the no urgency trap. I think in general, things have changed a lot since COVID. It's just much harder to get things done at companies. There's more people involved, there's more committees involved, and whatever you want to say about the economy, there's still some uneasiness about making decisions and people sticking their neck out there. So I think that makes our job harder, and it's harder to get urgency. And the definition that we put up here on the screen, and I'll go a little more in depth, is there's a difference between being a seller versus an order taker. Meaning, you know, if you got orders coming in, it feels good. It's great. It's a great place to be, but you're not necessarily going above and beyond to drive that active pain and urgency. If there is no urgency, sales reps will fail to keep momentum. Momentum is one of the hardest things to do in sales. So if you don't have urgency, you're definitely not going to have momentum. And what ends up happening is that you're going to be number 37 on the priority list, which basically means it's never going to happen, or maybe it will happen next year. So how do you get it at the top of the priority list, and how do you drive that urgency? And just to go a little bit further of why it's harder right now is I think the default is for nothing to happen. It's not even going against your competition a lot of times. It's really the status quo, and change is hard. The change management is the hardest part of a lot of what we do. And you have to really anticipate that of what that's going to look like. Also, if it's just a nice to have, if you can't really show the differentiators, why you're different, why they need it right now, it's just going to be a nice to have and not a must have. And people, based off what I said before, since COVID, if it's not in that top 5, it's just not probably going to happen anytime soon. Maybe it's next year, which is great, but it's not going to happen this first half, that's for sure. And I think if we can continue to think of sales as a prevention game and get ahead of these traps that we're talking about, especially this one, it's super important and going to make our lives easier and less stressful in the long run. So it's going to be hard either way in sales. Why not do the work on the front end versus having the after effects that we'll keep talking about? I have a couple examples just so we can talk about, hey, we're going to go really in depth into the examples on the next slide, but just I'll give you a real life one from me the last few years. So before this, I did a lot of consulting and sales training. So I would do a lot of workshops and events. A lot of times it was a national sales meeting, a sales kickoff. And actually Brian, who's not on here, he told me at one point, look, if they don't have a sales kickoff on the agenda, if it's not already on the calendar and planned for, it's going to be really hard for you to try to sell in a workshop or some type of program. And me being me, definitely have an ego sometimes. I listened to it, but had that ego, I had that confidence. I was like, oh, I'm sure I can still figure it out. Even if there's not an event on the calendar, it'll be all good. So what I found is that it was probably 5 to 10 times harder for me to get something done if there wasn't already an event planned for it, because I was fighting multiple battles. Not only was I trying to convince them of whatever sales process I was talking about and the outcome, but they had to budget for flying people into a new city, bringing everyone in, taking them out of the field for 2 or 3 days. If that wasn't already planned and on the agenda, my job just got substantially harder. So that I always think of that one because it made I thought I could get it done, even though I got feedback that you should probably look out for that. And then I learned the hard way. Okay, I'm only going to talk to people that have events coming up, because otherwise it's really challenging. So that's a fresh one that comes to my head. I don't know if anyone from our team on Brevity or anyone else has an example of, ways they've learned the hard way about urgency and not being on the priority list.
There's so many, right? So one of the ones that may not sound like the ones directly on the screen, but someone joins an initial qualification call, Dustin, and they're just immediately like, hey, just as a heads up, I heard about this, I'm interested, but we don't have any budget right now. And it's so easy to potentially go down that rabbit hole of that versus hearing it and really getting to the root of what's that number one pain or symptom contributing to lost revenue. We still got to focus on the initial qualification and leverage that to manufacture urgency regardless of what they say. So that is something that I've come across where they use budget as a way to I don't know if it's a defense mechanism because the vast majority of the logos behind this screen, close to 70%, didn't have budget allocated for this. So it's our job to make sure we manufacture that urgency, which I know we'll talk about on that next slide.
No doubt. Appreciate that. Else have anything? Great. So what does it sound like? So there's smaller examples of this, and then there's bigger. So we'll do a mix of both going throughout today, but you can see in that middle column there, what does it sound like? So for example, your customer could be saying, we're just exploring options right now. I need some time to think this over. That's probably a pretty common thing that we hear throughout this. And that could be potentially a red flag that maybe they're just shopping, they're doing an RFP, or they're not really, it's not an active pain, it's probably latent pain. So we need to be aware of that first off, but what can you do to try to counter that? And I'll do a role play later, but something we like to use a lot is, especially if you've had previous meetings, is, you know, what's changed since we last spoke. I thought we talked about this revenue loss being the number one priority for you and your team. So just simply saying what's changed since last time, I feel like that gets people talking, and you can see, hey, what did change, or maybe they forgot the conversation. So that's a great one to counter that out of the gates. One, hey, we're all trying to get in front of busy people. Everyone here is so busy. There's a million things going on. We got our phones going off nonstop. So you're trying to get on the calendar, and they say, I'm slammed next week. Just shoot me an email and just follow up that way. In theory, you're like, okay, they still want me to follow up. They seem warm, but if it's not on the calendar, the chances of getting something done are really tough. So how do you rebuttal that is big. So I would say something like, just to make it less of a commitment, hey, can we even just get it on there for 15 minutes? We're just going to focus on one thing. And if we need to cancel it before, let's cancel it, because I know you're really busy, but it's just better to have on the calendar. It's easier for both of us. Something like that. So maybe you drop it from 30 to 15 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe even 5, honestly, to do that. The other thing I've learned too is people that are really busy, 2 weeks out usually is a sweet spot that they might have more times available. If you're trying to do like next few days or next week, it's going to be tougher to find stuff on the schedule. So that's something that I like to do.
That one's money, Justin.
Which one?
That very last one. Yeah, being able to at the same time 2 weeks from now work on your schedule. It just gives them a vantage point right there. They say, oh yeah, it actually does. That one's been money.
And then this one comes up a lot because especially if you're selling something more enterprise or bigger average deal size, it's going to go up higher within the organization. But I need to run this by a few people. Let's touch base in a couple months. So there could actually be not a lot of active pain right now. That could be the truth. They could have committees. There's a lot going on there. A way that you can be proactive, in my opinion, is, I can use Kelvin, for example. Ideally, we would be proactive before getting into these situations. And maybe I had previously asked Kelvin to multi-thread and meet and meet some of the CEOs and different people in the C-suite. So I could come back with, my CEO, Kelvin, he's all over the place. He's always doing podcasts and different things. He's already met a lot of your leadership team. I think they're pretty aware of what's going on. Is there a way we could bring it all together? So Kelvin, I'm going to keep using you these next few months for sure. And we'll see if we can make that happen. But that one you want to get ahead of because it's going to be tough right there. Or maybe quite frankly, it's just not a good Q1 timing, Q2 timing. Maybe there is some stuff you need to talk through there. So anybody else have examples of, hey, when you get in these situations where it doesn't seem to be urgent, it's not a priority, and then they just try to push you off and you can't get the next step? There's got to be some other ones out there. Anybody have any? All right, we'll get people talking here soon enough. So the impact of not practicing and mastering this is you're going to end up giving Hail Mary discounts every quarter, which you feel good if you get the deal, but it doesn't really feel good to do that just to get in the door. And unfortunately, a lot of our customers are used to that now. So it's even harder because they expect it every quarter, but it's just a negative trickle effect. It could impact margin of the company. It could impact how much commission you get, and then just having to future discount in perpetuity. So it's not a great place to be. Number two, which is we've all been there for sure, is just getting ghosted. I think naturally people don't want to deliver bad news. Our brains are like pain avoidance machines. So we don't want to have the tough conversations. We don't want to tell people bad news. So if it's not a priority, if it's not urgent, they're probably just not going to respond, and they might just ghost. That's unfortunately pretty common in today's society in a variety of ways. And then longer sales cycle, sort of what Andy was talking about at the beginning. Like if you don't get ahead of some of this stuff, it's going to create longer sales cycles, which means the deals, it's going to be harder to keep momentum. It's going to be harder to keep it at the priority list, and it's going to stall out. It's more likely to stall out. And then that also has a negative ripple effect on our just personal well-being, because we get super burnt out. It's already a stressful job to begin with, but this makes it even harder if you got deals that are getting stalled. Anybody have any questions on this so that they feel good about the explanation of it? Any thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, Dustin, I think one of the things I realized before Brevity is I would get off a lot of calls when you get, an executive on the line and you hang up and you're like, shoot, I should have asked them X and Z. And if I was practicing more or using Brevity, that just becomes a habit, asking those tough questions, getting the right next steps. So you're taking more of a proactive approach versus getting off the call and say, oh crap, I should have asked Dustin all these questions. And then you're scrambling and then you're trying to chase the deal. So ever since I started with Brevity, like practicing all these different skills and these high level questions, I found that you get on the calls and it's just second nature. Like you don't even realize that you're asking all these questions and doing all these different proactive approaches just because you've done it 50 times against the AI. So I think that was a big epiphany for me coming to Brevity and starting to use this every day.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's harder to track some of that, but it's, the confidence, you had more confidence, you felt more comfortable, you were more prepared. And there's something to be said about that because you can react way better when you do that. So appreciate that, man.
Hey, Dustin, I think there's a couple of things that I've observed at play in these situations with our sellers. Number one, and unfortunately we have to own up to it, no matter how good we get at this, and I think most everyone has a lot of room to get better. That's why we have Brevity, because we want to get better. But no matter how good you get at the conversations, got to have enough in that pipeline. Going back to the conversation, the things that were being discussed earlier about are we witnessing stalled deals and so forth. My message to my sellers is that for 2025, we needed to not only be better at our conversations, and that's why we're requiring 10 Brevity conversations a week, but secondly, we need to have more qualified conversations and larger backlogs. So more activity, more qualified opportunities, and better conversations within those opportunities and better qualifying of those opportunities, because the dynamic we're discussing about a lack of urgency and these types of things is never going to be non-existent within the pipeline. Some opportunities are going to be better qualified than others, and you've got to have enough that when the one starts to wither a bit, you're not so anxious about it because it's do that one or die. You've got to have a big enough backlog to support that there are going to be weaker deals in your pipeline, and some of them you might not have qualified as well as you'd hoped you had, or the client wasn't as forthcoming with you about the qualifying questions that you asked to determine their urgency. And we got to be better, of course, as I mentioned earlier, got to be better at determining whether there's urgency and helping create urgency when we can. So it's an overall thing. My team, I've made it clear for 2025 that we're increasing volume and we're increasing quality and in terms of their skills. And without all of that, we'll not see substantial growth.
Jerry, I have a follow-up question. Out of curiosity, what's been some of the, I'd say, most effective ways your team's been able to manufacture urgency? One of my favorite, from at least a fundraising perspective, we have what's called a Minnesota Angel tax credit, right? And there's typically a deadline associated with that somebody had probably already wanted to invest anyway, but it accelerates the time frame for their ability to invest by saying, hey, the credit is actually going to be running out at the end of March. What have you found are some ways for your team and ways to manufacture urgency?
Well, there's very little in terms of regulatory or schedule type of urgency that we've been able to have. Our most effective way of creating urgency, Kelvin, is by qualifying well and having the most effective conversations and asking the right questions so that we can uncover the pain points and go down the pain funnel. I don't know how many of you guys are Sandler people, but we're big believers in going down the pain funnel with people in your qualifying meetings, and helping bring out that pain and get to understand it as well as possible. Most of urgency that we're able to generate is going to come as a result of that proper use of that time and questioning opportunities to listen to the client and clarify what it is that is going on in their business. And you got to develop trust in order to do that, because they won't share with you otherwise. So that it's that creating not creating, I don't call that really creating urgency. That's allowing urgency. By your reps allowing the client to share with you what's going on in their organization and where their owies are, so to speak. For all of our parents in the room will know what we're talking about there. But and then you simply develop the trust and form your offering around that pain as a way of being able to heal it, but not until you've uncovered it all. And if we've uncovered it all and allowed them to express it in their words and what it does to affect them and their team and their profits and everything else that's affected by it, urgency is always going to be a problem. Because we sell maintenance contracts. And to anybody who doesn't believe that you're going to solve some pain, the time to start a maintenance contract is when the hell ever, when I feel like it, when I want to see your guys' trucks here. So that's my thoughts on urgency. I think urgency is really a result of proper qualifying and proper questioning in the discovery phase.
Appreciate that, Jerry.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Dialing in that ideal customer profile and asking some of those tough questions early on can help prevent some of this too. I totally agree. Ben, go ahead to the next slide. So we'll spend about another 10 minutes or so on this one and hopefully get some more interaction from the team. And then I'm going to do a role play for about 5 or 6 minutes, and that should give us about 15 minutes or so to close out with any additional questions. But so yes, there a lot of times what Jerry was saying, you can get ahead of that with the qualification. And then there's some other ways too. So we wanted to give you our top 3 suggestions to prevent falling into the no urgency trap. So the first one is really finding a trigger event. So what I mean by that, the first question there is, what nightmares happen if they don't have your service? The best example I can think of, I don't know if we have a lot of people in SaaS and cybersecurity on today, but you hear about these cybersecurity breaches in the news. It seems like every week. And when that happens, it obviously sends a panic through the organization, but then other similar companies see that and they might have some urgency to do something. You obviously can't plan for that, but it's a great way to think about what nightmares happen if they don't bring your product or service in. And I know in the cybersecurity area, they try to push that of, hey, if you don't do this, something like this could happen. And they probably use examples of what that looks like. So that's a great quote unquote trigger event that I think could help. And I'm sure there's some other examples out there. Feel free to put it into the chat as we keep progressing here. Another, I think, pro level idea is whether it's referral partners or other avenues. What happens before you implement, either before or after? Because a lot of times we can't bring in our product or service if something didn't happen right before that. So if you can figure out what that is, maybe you already know, and get close with that company or that referral partner, you can be hand in hand with those leads that, hey, they're probably going to be, there's going to be a sense of urgency because they just implemented this. And then now we can come in and do our thing. And that happens pretty commonly in the software arena, but it can be in other industries as well. So feel free to shout me out in the chat or give some examples there, but that's a great one too. Another one is really trying to be more of a partner in crime versus just thinking about us, is like, not just, they're our customer that we're trying to sell into, but who are their end users and their customers? Because they probably have a ton of deadlines with whatever product that they're giving out there. So an example of that, I worked with a company out of Silicon Valley. Their customer was AMD, which is a massive company. And basically, if they didn't bring in their product, AMD was going to struggle delivering something for Apple, a massive company. And it was around Black Friday, the holiday season, so massive numbers involved. So when they shifted how they were presenting it to the customer about it could potentially negatively affect that deadline with Apple, that got people's attention, right, in a different way versus just pushing features and benefits and all that type of stuff. So be more of the partnership mentality, which I think is always a good thing, but going a level deeper to understand what they're going up against with their customers. A personal win. This is not always easy to do, but what is a personal win for that champion? I mean, perhaps if they implement your product or service, they could get a promotion, or they look good internally. Maybe something else that incentivizes them on that. I think that's always a really good thing, to understand something deeper than just whatever the ROI, whatever the outcome is. Like what is a win for them personally or professionally? I know a lot of times sometimes you'll see people that just got promoted or they moved to a new company. Those people are probably trying to make a name for themselves, potentially trying to ruffle some feathers, trying to do some new things. And I always have liked working in those situations because they are going to try to take some chances to make it happen. And then a couple of years in, if they're not performing, it might be a little bit tougher. I mean, we're all in sales here, right? If we're not performing after 18 months or so, then it's tough. But I think we got some questions in the chat. Kelvin, you want to help me out with that, or Ben, what they're saying?
Yes, let's see. What are some ways you can continue to stay in touch with them even though it's not a priority?
It's a great question. You're probably going to need to spread it out over a longer period of time. Like, you're certainly not going to have a weekly touch base if it's not a priority, but I would somehow try to get on their calendar at least once a quarter. That way you can catch up on some of these questions we're talking about. What's changed since we last spoke? What's the biggest priority? What's holding you guys back? I mean, and you can even put it just for 15 minutes. I would do it something very easy, simple, like not a huge commitment, and just having it on the calendar makes so much difference. And I'm going to talk about that as my number 3 point. So I would try to go for like quarterly if it's not super urgent right now, because that's less intrusive and that will give you a better chance to do that. Also, in between, providing value, not asking for anything. So whether it's resources from your company that are helpful to them, it's thought leadership articles, it's following them on LinkedIn and supporting whatever they're posting. You got to go above and beyond if it's an opportunity that you're pursuing, and you need to keep track of that somehow. But you don't want to just completely not do anything and then follow up and like be asking for something. That's not going to go over pretty well. So I think you got to have that giving mentality and somehow keep track of this, whether it's through a CRM or LinkedIn, and get something on the calendar for sure. And I'm open to others' feedback. Kelvin or Ben, if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, I've seen it on your end, Dustin, where, you have, and we've closed some deals where it's like, hey, not the right time. We got budget approval for 2025. Ben and I, we've worked on one, for the international company, and I think at the time it was probably like either every other month or at least quarterly, where we would also keep him informed of new product roadmap updates, new case studies, just to stay top of mind. Talk about how others are, being engaged with the software. Jerry, I loved your 10 conversations a week. That's really good benchmark. But yeah, that was one way. And then depending on the length of the contract, what we also have seen work well is actually starting smaller in parallel. So for example, if we replaced the system where engagement rates were absolutely atrocious for sales leaders wanting to use the platform, as well as sellers and trainees on their team wanting to use it. So we ended up getting in there, and we were able to justify getting in there sooner, even though they had an existing contract, but starting small, proving value with a small population. And the justification was, one, it was a smaller size to get in there because they already gave us the pain that there's a tool that they're on a multi-year agreement with, but they're not engaged. So we were able to justify, hey, this is where we can see the boost of engagement, which could have a positive impact on your revenue performance on a smaller scale. So when it's time to actually cancel and not renew that contract, they are already acclimated to that software, to our software.
Agreed. Yeah, that big deal trap where you try to go too big too fast. Maybe you could do something smaller. Like if they're shying away a little bit, maybe it's because you're trying to go too big too fast, and maybe you can do something a little easier commitment to get in the door. I agree. Was there any other questions, Ben?
Nope, that was
Okay.
it.
Cool. All right. So the next one, which is one of our favorites, we've got about 5 more minutes here, and then I'll do the role play, is what we call the business justification. But another question for y'all, if anyone wants to chime in, is how do you guys work with your teams, or how does your team send out the business case? Do they just send quotes? Do they send proposals? Do you guys have a format for maybe a business document that shows it? What are y'all's teams doing? Are they just sending quotes, proposals? Anybody?
Well, I know for my experience, before I met Kelvin and the Brevity team and Brian Burns, I was just sending out quotes. You get off a successful first call, or if they love the product, oh, this is great, I want to buy it, and then you get excited and you fire out the pricing, and then nothing happens. So I think you're going to talk about it, Dustin, but I think that this business justification that Dustin's going to go in detail about it's been a game changer for us at Brevity, but also every client that we introduce it to, they end up using it and adopting it as part of their sales process to get more buy-in and close more deals. So I think I used to do that. I'm guilty of it, but this has been a super game changer for me.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm going to touch base into it with the role play. So I'll probably we can do it as a follow-up, but essentially what Ben was talking about, if you just send a quote, we all we get excited when people ask for a quote and all that, and we send it. Sometimes then they have everything they need. They have no reason to talk to us. It's just a number on a piece of paper, and all they see is the costs. So that's not always a good thing, because they usually might go with the lowest cost. So it's a different approach to the quote, and it also helps momentum and keep the urgency going, which I'll talk about in the role play. And then the last thing is recurring meetings. This is probably the simplest thing out of everything we talked about. This is the one thing that can really help your sales career if you get good at it, is just having recurring meetings on the calendar, especially if you're dealing with bigger customers, bigger projects. I used to deal with Home Depot corporate, hospital systems. They had so many silos that I was trying to be an extension of their team and make it easier for them. So I almost saw myself as a project manager with bi-weekly calls, monthly calls, whatever it may be. And you got to get a lot of people on your side. So it's almost like a political campaign sometimes, but those reoccurring meetings can make a huge difference. And it's something simple. If you save 5 minutes at the end of every meeting to try to make sure you get that next step, it's going to save you a lot of headaches and keep you top of mind, which will help you not go into this trap.
Yeah, I'd say this one skill alone, the meeting cadences, recurring meetings, that alone will increase your win rate, I would say 10 to 15%, just by staying top of mind, continuing the conversation, even if it isn't a huge priority, like Dustin talked about earlier, just staying with them, building that rapport, building that partners in crime. Because there is going to come a time where it becomes more of an urgency, and they're going to think of, oh, it was Dustin, it was Kelvin, it was, Johnny. So I think that one skill alone is worth introducing to your team.
No doubt. And it's very simple too. So, all right, let's do the role play. My first inaugural role play publicly. So this should be fun. And I will get this going here. I think it's about 5 or 6 minutes. And it should be pretty quick. So you guys can stay with me, root me on. We'll see if I get a good score here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, and then if for some reason you don't hear the audio, just shout it out, but it should be good to go. All right, so about 5 minutes, let's do it.
Three, two, one. Start speaking.
Matt, great to see you. Looks like you got some pep in your step. You guys been closing a ton of deals in Q1?
Hi there. Always good to see familiar faces. We've been pushing hard and definitely seeing some traction, but just keeping the momentum going and staying focused on our goals. How about you? How's everything on your end?
That's great to hear. It's been an awesome start. As you know, I just started with Brevity, and we've had a record-breaking Q1 and hoping to continue that momentum and dive right into it. I know you also mentioned that you missed that ski vacation in Tahoe, but you're planning to do it in the first half of this year. Are you going to be able to make that happen?
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Congratulations on your record-breaking quarter. As for Tahoe, I'm still trying to fit in some time between our hectic schedules to make that happen. Hopefully, things slow down a bit in the coming months so I can finally hit those slopes. How are you celebrating your big success this quarter?
Glad to hear that. I love Tahoe, love skiing as well. Yeah, I try to take a little vacation every quarter just so I can break away, and that helps me stay on top with all the stress that we have in sales. But it was good catching up. Appreciate that. Just to quickly recap our last conversations, we were talking about how in Q4 specifically at Grammarly, some deals were slipping and stalling that left about $2 to $3 million of revenue on the table. And then you and I went deep into why that was happening. And it really came down to a couple key symptoms. The first was that your team was sending out quotes nonstop and maybe way too early before they'd really justified the product, and were getting ghosted after they sent the quotes and nothing was happening. And then the second thing was being single threaded and not working with the right person and not multi-threading within the account. And this was a big concern because of not only what happened in Q4 with that $2 to $3 million, but also because you guys have a big new product launch in 2025. And it's crucial that this doesn't happen for that new product launch because it's going to be a big impact to the team. What else did I miss? Was that the top priorities that we spoke about?
Yeah, you've captured the gist of our last discussion quite well. Those are definitely the main challenges we faced, especially the early quoting and single-threaded approaches. Addressing these is vital for our upcoming product launch. We're just in a bit of an exploratory phase right now, getting a feel for how best to proceed without rushing into decisions.
I can totally relate to that. I guess what's changed since last call, because I know that new product launch was a huge priority and your C-suite as well as the board was going to be all over you about it. And essentially you could maybe lose out on a couple $1 million in revenue in the first quarter if we didn't get ahead of that quote trap that we talked about. Did something change since we last spoke?
Not much has changed fundamentally, but we're diligently working on refining our processes to avoid falling into the same traps. We're just treading carefully, making sure that when we decide on any strategy or solution, it truly aligns with our long-term objectives. Would love to explore innovative ways to address these challenges without rushing into commitments.
Totally get that. Thanks for the feedback. Something that we typically do at this point with similar customers like yourself is put something together called a business justification. It's really a one source of truth, a working document that you and I and the rest of the team can go back and forth on. And it showcases why this needs to be done now, a little overview of what it's all about, what the alternatives are, and if showcases the timeline of when to get it done. And it makes you look good internally. It shows that we did our homework, and it's a draft. It's a working document, so it's not final. We'll keep going back and forth, and I'll take the heavy burden of that and do most of the work, but just need you and your team to give some input throughout that. Would that be reasonable for us to start putting that together?
I appreciate the thoroughness of that approach. The business justification document does sound like a comprehensive tool, but I'm just not certain we're ready to dive into such a detailed process at this time. We're honestly still exploring our options, and I'd prefer to revisit this discussion in a few months when we have more clarity on our strategy. How flexible is the timing on getting this started?
Look, Matt, we can always be flexible. You're a top opportunity for us, so we'll be flexible within reason. I would just go back to we had some pretty candid conversations in Q4. I know you had some late nights. You were working on weekends. You had the board calling you because of those revenue misses. And I just hate for that to happen again in Q1 or Q2. I know we're in the middle of the quarter right now, so maybe it's not as top of mind, but that same thing could happen potentially at the end of the quarter. So I'd like to get ahead of it if possible. We can start small though. We don't need to do a major implementation, and we can document that in the justification and refine it together. Would you be open to just spending 15 minutes next week to go over that? And in the meantime, I'll send you a working Google Drive that we can go back and forth via email.
I understand your concern about not repeating past revenue misses, and it's certainly something on my radar too. However, while flexibility is important, we're really just in an exploratory phase and not quite ready to allocate time for this process. Let's revisit this in a few months once we have a clearer direction and strategy in mind. Thank you, though, for offering the Google Drive document. I'll review it when we can focus more on this.
Totally get that. How about this? I'll send out an invite for like 5 or 10 minutes next quarter, just so we have it. We can cancel it if need be, but just so we have something, because I know you're really busy. And I'll get that business justification document out to you later this month. Not urgent, as you said, but would that work?
I appreciate your understanding, but I'd prefer not to commit to something even as small as a placeholder right now. Our priorities might shift, so let's touch base organically when we're both ready. Thanks for being flexible and for sending over the document later. I'll keep an eye out for it.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
Not easy. Good stuff, Dustin.
How'd I do?
Yeah, I
That's a
love.
tough cookie.
Yeah, that person was a tough cookie. I mean, it's just the purpose of practice, right? My question is, what outside of the exploratory and checking out other solutions, what the hell are they going to currently do to fix those problems? Like, what are they working on? Like, that was a hard one. Was it harder than the 78 and 80s?
Yeah, it got harder. That's weird because the first few I did, I practiced and I got the 78 and 80. So I don't know what I changed there. I guess I got too much pressure on the spot.
Hey, it's better we do it on AI than in real life. So that is a living testament of the value proposition of brevity. I know we have 8 minutes left. And thanks for everybody joining the call. Just kind of want to open it up to questions, comments, thoughts. How would you have handled those questions, or any even feedback for us? We don't have all the answers.
Hey, we got to be open to feedback. So give me some feedback. Where did I mess up? I don't know what I changed compared to the first ones, but let's get some feedback from folks. What would you have done differently?
Well, I don't know if I've done anything differently. That was brutal. That AI on that is, that a couple of months ago, Ben did a single thread it was just like that. I'm glad you start them that way because you can relax them a little bit more, I guess. I'd be curious to know what adjustments have been made to that single thread. And maybe if Ben's got a recording, he can send us of any changes that might have affected the quality of that single thread role play.
Yeah,
from
I'd be happy to
every-
send over some recent examples.
Did-
I did this one this morning, Dustin, and it definitely was harder. One thing I tried is like when you like, let's put it out to next quarter. I didn't ask him. I just said, hey, I'll just put something out next quarter and we could touch base then. And he seemed to be open to that. So, I mean, what do you guys think of taking more of an assumptive approach about following up instead of asking?
I think it's probably effective. I'd be curious to see the recording of Dustin's 80 on that
Yeah.
one and see what he did differently.
Yeah, and I'm really curious. Dustin, your recap of single threaded the top changes, I thought that was amazing. The only question I would want to hear from him, I know you're exploring options, but what has not changed are these still issues. I think he already admitted in the role play that those symptoms of contributing to lost revenue and the board recap were the same. I'm confused. Like, what the hell is your team currently doing to alleviate these challenges? Are you guys just remaining with status quo? And full stop. I want to hear what he had to say to that.
Yeah, you just may remember
It seems idiotic to spend all this time on and the other thing is highlighting that we already demonstrated in the technical evaluation that we can alleviate these. What has, like, I'm just genuinely confused. Is there something you guys are doing differently? Is there something you're not telling me? Because our payback period is typically within 30 days.
Yeah, maybe it wanted me to go back and forth a little bit more. The one thing I forgot to add, on the spot was time back. The reason I did the Tahoe thing is I was gonna be like, man, you missed that vacation. I was just gonna go keep deeper and deeper, like all that pain, try to get it top of mind with like the family side and the business side of like, man, late nights, boards calling you on the weekends, you got family missing vacation. But yeah.
That's a tough one.
What else did
I'm
we
curious.
miss? What else did we miss?
I'm curious. Could you email us a link to the recording of your 80s?
I think
Yeah,
so.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
We can Loom video. We can get that as a Loom video post. Yep.
I'd like to see that and the difference. And Ben, I know you'd like to redeem yourself from that last one with the single thread. Wouldn't bother me to see a recording of your higher scores on that.
Yeah, those are pretty tough. Sometimes I'll start my morning off with a good score. I'm feeling good for the day, and then sometimes I'll get a horrible score, and it'll be a tough morning. So
Yeah. I guess I seriously would like to. I like looking at those contrasts. When
Yep.
my team when someone on my team has a 49 and they get it up to 80, I want to look at them both and measure the differences.
Yep.
And I'd really like to see, because I haven't rolled out that single thread to my team yet, because I don't want them killing themselves.
yeah, that's a good point.
But, so I really would like to see if you could be kind enough to send me those contrasting videos that we haven't seen. That'd be great.
Sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
Dustin,
that's-
hi, it's Tamara here. Thank you for doing that. That was fun to watch. And I'm sorry that I had to join so late, but this is great. I was almost thinking when you were, I don't really know the whole gist of how the conversation started because I joined a little late, but I was thinking maybe if you could make him be the hero. So if he were to do these changes this quarter, if we can start those changes by next quarter, whatever you wanted him to do, he'd see these results and be able to report out on those results the following quarter. Like how long, if he initiates change, when would he see see results. So you could maybe get him pushing on a time frame a little sooner for the results he wants to see. That was the only other thing I could think of, is make him a hero, and how he'd be a hero, you know, what it would look like when he went through the initiation of change.
Thanks for joining. Good to hear from you. It's been a while. Yes, that's a great one, because then it starts getting thinking about the cost of not doing it now, right? If he wants to be in front of the board at the end of Q2, you got to make the results happen in Q1 to show that. So I love that. And that's where you start, the higher up you go, these conversations, you got to be thinking at the C-suite board level, and that can be tough, right? But I love that. That's a great one. You didn't miss too much. It was about 6 minutes, and I was just recapping previous conversations, and glad you were able to join and see that. It's you know, one thing I love about Brevity is that you really, I mean, sales is an accountability profession, and you got to be a student of the game, and there's always someone out there smarter than you that's better, and this helps you do it in private, maybe not as much publicly. I just did it publicly, but it forces you to get better in a proactive way. And if we don't do this in sales, like it's hard, right? What I was saying at the beginning, sales is hard. So I think we have to be doing stuff like this. Otherwise you get eaten alive, because you just can't remember all this stuff in your head. It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. More, make it intuitive, make it repetitive. Well, thank you. That was great.
Well, I know we got 1 minute left. Team, thank you for joining on this Friday. I hope this helps drive urgency so we all have a good end to Q1. Dustin, awesome job. Thanks for putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, and doing that role play in front of everybody. So, we'll let everybody get back to it. And then also, if there's any feedback, comments, questions on what we can do to improve these revenue performance webinars, definitely let us know. And yeah, have a great rest of the quarter. See you guys next month.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.